welcome back to Interpolation. I'm Leo. I'm here with my friend Vivek via
Hi,
satellite, as we used to say. So via internet. Hello, Vivek.
hi guys.
So today we're going to talk about a pretty important subject. It's both establishing and maintaining trust in software development, software products in the age of AI. So how do we maintain that? And just we'll give our thoughts as to what works, what we need to do more of, what we need to change our thinking on. And I wanted to introduce it as a two-part thing. One is, two layers of trust. One would be the reputational kind, which is what you have with either an individual or a vendor, like a brand that you trust or an individual that you trust. And the second one would be more of a systems industry type thing where you have third parties or processes that can help you, especially as somebody new to a product or a service, can look at and how that vendor who's providing can use those systems to convince prospective customers that they're trustworthy and they can maintain trust. But let's start with, at the individual level. I think this is probably the most important, especially when we think about, kind of software development professionals. And Vivek, I think you've got a lot of experience in this space. You've done it for a long time. You're very trustworthy, and I think you have a good idea of what it takes, going forward to maintain this. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your thoughts about this, and then we'll get to the systems part later.
Right. So it was during my freelance career, which was about from 2005 until around 2012, when I used to do varied projects for various clients via this website called what used to be called rentacoder.com, which is now freelancer.com. And in the very initial stages itself, it was very obvious that there was no easy way to establish trust between the employer and the employee. Of course, the site guaranteed that if you did your work and there was any dispute, they would actually sit down and resolve it, and the escrow money would be refunded or paid out to the developer. So it was kind of it had a one way. You could trust the employer, like if he's put down the money and you did the job, you're going to get the money. But then the employer had no guarantee that the job would get done. Even if he did get his money back, he might have wasted a lot of time. So it was quite obvious from the start that the people who are winning the projects, like you had to go and bid on a kind of auction and kind of give your pitch, like what makes you capable of delivering the project. It was necessary to establish trust that you would get the job done. So I think what I found talking to many clients and having worked with some clients for multiple projects over several years is it doesn't matter even if you have a lot of resume to show, you have examples of work that you've committed and all that. They have to first look at you as a human being that they can trust. Obviously, I come from the third world, so to speak, India, and someone who's in Vietnam or China or I have worked with clients across the world,
Sure.
and there's always a cultural gap and there's some cultural biases, and you really don't know who you're dealing with, right? Both
Mhm.
it works both. Like for example, when I worked with some Chinese clients, it was very hard to get through to them because they're Asian, quite similar to Indians in some ways, but the way they think about projects and deliverables and code and the way they think about systems is quite different from how we used to do it. So the first thing is to kind of not look at it as just the employer-employee kind of relationship, but the fact is we're both humans. We're playing a positive sum game. Both of us are better off for having done the deal, right?
Mhm.
So I've always found that being less formal and just being frank and open did create the same reaction in them as well. So you got a conversation going, and then you get to know each other. You do a little small talk. They see you as more than just a resource, that a black box where the money goes in, the product comes out, and then you can start talking about what you worked on, and then whatever you claim and whatever you give them the information that holds more weight. So I think the human angle of trust is like most important, because you can compose even in the pre-AI age. It's possible to spend a lot of time composing something that looks very impressive in the resume,
Mhm.
but does it hold out in real life? No. But when they talk to you, when they chat with you live, they get a sense of who you really are, because you can't it's not so easy to exaggerate your capability so much. And then some of the smarter clients would quickly catch on. And then there were many clients who very luckily for me, they just They just realized that they were better off just letting me do my thing, and then I would get the job done, right? And that's the best kind of thing for both the worker and the employee, because they have the trust that you'll deliver, and you don't have to be micromanaged, or you don't have to be constrained by any decisions that they might have based on certain biases or lack of knowledge. So then those kind of projects really worked out, because I built a large end-to-end systems without much other than just a weekly progress report or a few demos, and then they were happy to get it in time. And you build trust by you do a few things, right? Because there's a few things in trust. The first bit of trust is the social angle, that you have a social contract which is legal and you're fulfilling it. You're not making it harder for them to work within that contract, so you get the job done as per spec. But then there's again the higher part of it is the human part, right?
Mhm.
As a human being, you want to go over and beyond, right? That's what makes you, that's what will differentiate you from the next competitor, right? So that human thing of going above and beyond, suggesting something that's going to save them money or going to save them time, suggesting a way by which the amount of work is reduced, and maybe even taking a pay cut, saying that I'll do it simply for you. You don't have to pay me so much money. Let's cut the contract in half. So they realize that you're working towards mutual benefit and not just a kind of a very transactional way of working. So I did work with a lot of good clients, and they were very happy with me. And I did think that this one thing, trying to always go above and beyond, maybe do a few hours work extra, and what you'll gain in terms of trust and future benefits is way more than what you could have. You have to play the long game. You have to build a relationship, right? And that's been most obvious with working with you. Like
Yeah.
we went from just small contract work to kind of a very long term relationship, and we have a shared history now, right?
Mhm.
So that's great.
Yeah. Um, if I could just touch on a couple of things, because I think that was brilliantly said as usual. But you're actually talking about the form of trust that you're referring to is actually the oldest kind of trust that there is between parties, right? I mean, it's and it's the handshake. Whether
Yeah.
it's physical or virtual, it's the fact that you establish enough credibility to where, more important than anything that's written down on paper, you gave your word that you're going to do something. It's funny, we come back to this a lot in our discussions, but we see this a lot more, I think, in more traditional business cultures, say like in Asia, specifically Japan.
Yeah, the
The
honor.
legal lease is critical from a compliance perspective, but at the end of the day, I remember one of my mentors, the first time I did any business in Asia, he had been doing it for decades. He told me, he said, the one thing you need to remember about this is your word is your word, right? It's like your credentials and your, sort of your external reputation will get you in the door, potentially, as you mentioned. Maybe that's your resume, maybe it's your whatever it is. They saw you somewhere, they know you through a third party. But what keeps you in the room is your ability to convince and deliver what you promise to the other human being. And the key variable there is time and repetition, right? It takes, especially in the more traditional cultures, it takes a very long time to build this reputation. Once you have it, you've earned that implicit trust, as you mentioned, where your customers, your clients felt most effective with you was to just kind of let you do the work because they knew you would deliver, right? But the one downside to this is that if you stop delivering all of a sudden, it's much faster to unwind than it is to build, that reputation. So,
Mhm.
and it's not just, you're thinking about it like, from the common good perspective, like you want to go above and beyond for your clients, but you also want repeat business. That's
Yeah,
mutually beneficial.
yeah.
And the one way to earn that is to deliver, and deliver, and in some cases deliver more than they were expecting, and then it's much easier to earn. You're like the go-to guy after that, right? So that takes a long time, and unfortunately there's a lot of bad actors out there, right? And I would say on both sides of the table. I mean, there are, people like to throw corporations under the bus and say, "Oh, these are evil corporations, they steal from you." But you and I know firsthand.
Mhm.
In fact, we shared an experience not long ago at an employer we were both with, where we were defrauded by an employee who basically like faked his interview and did all, and this is all like with these tools that we have now. this is becoming easier and easier to do. So yeah, I think very well said. That human element is the one thing, and by the way, the fraud is getting so good, and kind of the agentic stuff is getting so real that it takes a while to detect this, but eventually, as human beings, we realize that, hey, this is the real deal, or this is not the real deal. And I hope that we can continue to differentiate that. And, otherwise, I think a lot of things in society are going to break down. But let's pivot maybe a little bit to, so that's, from a personal perspective, like, let's say now you're in an organization, and you're building software for either for an employer or for clients as part of some business, and you now have access to all these tools that you didn't have before. And some of these
Yeah.
tools, as you know, agentic tools will write code for you, they'll test it, they'll deploy it for you, all these different things. It's very tempting to outsource your own personal work to these things, and we know it's actually happening. And there's a lot of companies doing it right, and or people, let's say, and there's people doing it wrong. So tell me about, like, when part of your reputation is in your actual work product and the quality of your
Yeah.
work. So when you're outsourcing that, walk me through, or let's say vibe coding, we'll just say the word. Walk me through, like, how you continue to maintain that trust, even though you're not the guy who actually really built a lot of the functionality.
Yeah, so personally, when I'm using AI to develop, I haven't yet, by policy in it, I haven't yet used AI in my actual work, right?
Okay.
I've only done personal projects. And I find it terrifyingly difficult to guarantee anything. I find it like I would have to work really hard to, ensure the kind of quality that I would do if I were doing it myself. It all boils down to how much of the code do you really know, right? Which you've
Mhm.
discussed in past podcasts. And often the only way to read code is when you write it. It doesn't matter. I don't know about a lot of people, but I think uh, I can't speak for everyone, but I think the majority of people can write code much better than they read. And part of writing that code is to read it while you're writing it. And so
Mhm.
you have the memory of having written it, it stays in your mind.
Yes.
Then you form the context. It doesn't form when you just look at the code because coding is kind of non-linear. You write function here, you write function there, you refactor things. But when you look at a text file and just read the functions line by line, it's just not the same. And
Right.
the mental effort is way more harder because you don't have the initial context starting from which the code was written. It's much more difficult. So I haven't dared yet to kind of say that I could build something with AI. And one project that I'm doing for someone else, which is which they themselves are giving me the AI to use. I am only doing the part that is I'm trying my hardest to read everything that is written. Um, Luckily, the code is not that complex because there's some algorithmic code and it's fairly easy to grok. It hasn't reached, a complexity where there are multiple entities and networks and, all kinds of relationships with it. It's just a basic mathematical manipulation. So it's easy enough. But the whole UI and the test harness and everything is only for my use. So I can wipe code that and just, wing it. But I would be very even UI code. I find that it makes great UIs. Agentic stuff makes great UIs, but then puts these very subtle bugs in them, which are very hard to find because it just doesn't have the whole context. We've talked about this quite often. So I feel that going back a little to the early days, right? Back in the day, there was no open source software, but you would download free shareware,
Mhm.
and the only way you knew that it worked was someone would have written about it in some magazine or something, or it's from some reputed guy. I mean, Phil Katz writes the next version of PKZip, and you download it, and you know it's going to work. But and often the only test that it's not malicious is that the antivirus scans it and says it's fine, which is okay. I mean, like it's not going to format your hard disk or something.
Mhm.
But now you have open source, and for a long time, open source works because multiple people get onto it. They review it, they check it out. You can see the guys' repositories, and no one can fake so many. No one can build a bunch of repositories which have a bunch of stars which are all faked, right? Or which are of either through incompetence or
Yeah,
malicious.
there's also
There's
just
no,
no incentive to do that. I
yeah, there's
mean,
no incentive.
that's the other part of it, is even if you, because if you wanted to fake reviews, you could,
Yeah.
but your open source, you're not getting monetary reward from that. You're
Yeah.
just pure malice, right? So yeah.
Right. So you could just clone something and, a bunch of packages on my Linux system are just that. This GitHub package which are cloned and, they get built and they run and they're part of the system. So that was that. But now you have repositories which are thousands of lines of code written by an AI
Mhm.
with a bunch of stars because anything with an AI gets a star now, right? And so where's the trust? I mean, what is even the guarantee that it does what it says or it looks like what it's supposed to look on the screenshots, right? There's absolutely zero guarantee. There is
Yeah.
no legal binding, there's no advertisement, there's no manual. There's not even a person you can talk to and say, like, look, you sold me the software, it says it does this, but it doesn't do this. So
They might not even know,
yeah,
like,
I mean,
might not even understand the code that was produced, right? To be
right.
able,
And
yeah,
I don't know if people are actually even doing end-to-end UI testing on their vibe coding apps. Just doing it and then doing like, I mean, how many people do? Many people don't even do that, right? It's like even look at mainstream software. Mainstream software is not exhaustively tested. There are dark corners and you find them and you're like, what's the hell? I mean, the entire blogs devoted to how Windows behaves strangely in certain ways and so on and so forth.
yeah,
The
yeah.
system is complex enough; you cannot examine the entire behavior. So I think now more than anything, it's quite impossible to establish the trust that a program does what it says, and that's like a huge problem. Like, how do you even build that trust? The
Yeah.
only way would be like people who already have trust, like some famous open source guy would maybe Fabrice Ballard writes a vibe coded app and then shows the world how it's done, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to depend on that, and then it boils down to the same thing. Like when I used to get stuff, custom parts for my bike build, you go to the market where the all the workers and the people who make the parts and the welders and the fabricators are all in the same locality. You don't know who to go to, but you call the person that you trust, and then he calls another guy, and that guy calls another guy,
Mhm.
and you kind of follow the chain of trust down, and then you use trust by proxy, and then you get the guy who does the job well, and then you become a part of the chain because you pay the guy, and he does you pay him well, and then he gets to know your project and so on. So it's kind of like a network that's formed, but it's difficult in software. We just know there are a few names in software which are very well known and trusted, but we need to have that. We need to have that chain of trust, and we need to have some way of indicating or measuring that. How are we going to do that? It's a very tough problem.
You're talking about industry wide in the sense that, and I think it really works well for open source where you have these are public figures. You mentioned Fabrice. It brought back memories from 20 years ago. Hacking on QMU and stuff like that. But anyway, um, yeah, I mean, brilliant guy, obviously, and I would put Linus Torvalds and, maybe not the same exact category, but maybe something even bigger. But that brings us an interesting point. I mean, Linux. So the policy on Linux is, and by the way, this is what my developers have chosen to do on my teams
Mhm.
is you own the quality, right? Like it doesn't matter how you produce because we've adopted AI assisted agentic type tools for building software, but our developers very quickly said, okay, we're not, and maybe I shouldn't say it. I don't think this is the case, but it's a little bit self-serving. It's like you don't need to replace me because I'm still the guy that's going to verify this stuff. But that was never a threat in any way. It's like our posture was how can we increase production, not how can we reduce cost, right? That's always been our posture. So, but anyway, we encourage it. We actually standardized on it. We have enterprise agreements, and but the developers themselves said, look, what we're doing is we're actually moving up the value chain. So we're having, now instead of, and the analogy they used, commonly used, which is true, is that when you had to write something and you didn't remember how to do it, you just went to Stack Overflow, Googled it, and I shouldn't say copy and paste it, but let's say inspired from somebody's solution on Stack Overflow, which is actually how these LLMs are trained. So it's not that
Yeah.
we're doing the same thing. We're just doing it now through an agent instead of directly. So what has changed is that can just happen. You can iterate a lot more there, right? So for example, let's say that you wanted to build something and some piece of functionality and you have the one example that I heard is maybe it takes me a week to write it and test it and do all this stuff and now I'm invested in this, like I can't let it fail because I spent all this time and now I have to make it work. Maybe with the agents, what you do is you try 15 different versions, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that until you find one that seems to fit and you take that one and bring it up to the quality standard that you want. But what's happening is, I think people are realizing this. You're moving the bottleneck from building that sort of prototype to checking to make sure it works. And there's still only so much you can do to ensure enough quality before you can move to the next step, which is to actually ship it and or maybe send it to QA, whatever it is, whatever your process does. So it's an interesting balance now to, okay, how do we go faster? But yeah, the developers are doing arguably what's worse than, like, it's more tedious, right? Like you said, writing code's easy. It's the reading code and understanding it that's hard. So you have to be very selective with what it is that you actually generate. But developers are doing this now because their name, like the rule is, no, if you check this in, you do the PR, the pull request, you're responsible for the quality. You're certifying, you're signing off on this as the PR, submitter, and then it's going to be reviewed by your peers, et cetera, the same way as before. But regardless of how you produce the code, right? You're saying number one, it's authentic. Like I didn't just copy it from somebody else that I'm not allowed to copy it from. And number two, if it was generated, I checked it. I made sure it does what it does supposed to do, that there's no hidden, obvious flaws in it, things of that nature. So that kind of dovetails a little bit into, so I'm going to disagree with you just a little bit. Like there is, it's not that there is no way. There's no way if you give up on, if you delegate your responsibility as well. You can delegate your work, but you can't delegate your responsibility. Your responsibility, especially
Yeah.
as a senior developer, is to deliver code that works, that meets a certain standard, that's secure, blah, 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 right? All of that. So you can't delegate that unless you trust this agent so much that, and I don't know of any agent you can trust that much these days, but maybe in the future, that you can say, yes, I don't even need to look at it. I know it works because I
Yeah.
told.
The point is, even if I'm a very senior developer, I don't even trust myself to get it right. That's the whole point of getting a peer review, right?
Right.
So like I can see that even if something, there might be a small typo, or there might be some fundamental flaw that someone else might catch.
Hmm.
And I have to read that myself multiple times, and it's bad enough reading my own code.
Yeah.
And so, considering that AI generates 50 to 100 times as much code as a person would do in a day, and it's definitely neither consistently stylistic nor idiomatic. It doesn't even have a flavor to it. It's every request kind of generates. It's like a bunch of. It's kind of like the repository we had when we first started in the Java's project, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a bunch of. It was very clearly written by multiple people who were not even talking to each other. It looked
Sure.
like that.
Sure. Sure.
So AI code looks like every request, and you change the agent in the code just. You're spending too many tokens on Opus, and you say, okay, let me switch to Gemini, it's cheaper or something, and then it starts doing things differently. I don't know. It's just it's. I think if the scale weren't a problem, like if it was just writing 150 lines code a day, very well. The job to review that is very much doable. But then why would you do that? Because you could very well do that as a
So,
make
yeah.
itself. Uh,
So I guess interestingly though, what you're saying is that the two problems you identified, one is stylistically, and I forgot what the other one was. Uh, I guess
Consistent flavor,
con-
I guess. Like
consistent flavor, right? I feel like those are two things that are going to be solved quickly, right? Because if there's one thing that these things can do is imitate. We know that.
yeah.
This is like, it's a matter of time before you tell it, you know, uh, kind of like how you used to with those stylizers, like make this picture, make it look like a Picasso, and it would do it for you. You would say, make it look like I wrote it, right? And it's already read like thousands of lines of your own code. It knows what your tendencies are, or follow a standard operating procedure, whatever it might be. I feel like those problems will be solved. But to your point, even if you write the code yourself, you don't even trust that it works until you've gone through the whole review process, all that stuff. So that's not, the style is not the problem. All that's doing is just making it more difficult to verify this stuff.
Yeah.
So even when that problem is solved, you're still, again, back with the
Yeah.
bottleneck of how do I put my name on this, right?
You can't eliminate the human in the loop. And I think especially if you're going to ship software, which is going to cost people money and deal with real world stuff, you can't really you can't delegate everything. It's
Right.
impossible to do that. Like I'm sure that all the automobiles made in Japan with the robotic factories, they still pick one out of they pick random samples in this test system, and the engineers run the test, right?
Yes. Yes.
And there was a huge it was a very tragic thing that a huge number of motorcycles that Kawasaki sold in 2022 and 2020 onward up 2024 had a serious crankshaft issue because one of the robots was torquing the bolts a little too much,
Oh,
right? How it
yeah.
how it end up with the wrong value, no one knows. But they're going to have to open up the crankcase of you know what 20,000-30,000 bikes, which is a huge loss for the company, right? How are they going to get it to the dealer, get it done, refunds,
Yeah.
all those things. So at some point, it doesn't matter how even deterministic systems like those CNC robots can go awry.
You can't go unsupervised, right? They're they're still machines, right? Because even a
Yeah.
basic machine needs calibration, needs tuning, needs all these different things, right? So on a regular basis,
Yeah.
they can fail. This is what happens with automated systems.
So I think the legislation is going to be very strong. Once you have a few disasters with AI, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be all kinds of laws drawn up about how you're going to pay for mistakes done by the code that you. It's going to become a harder job. Basically, you're going to have to be much more diligent, and you're going to have to sign a lot of legal forms and stuff. And you're going to have to take accountability because it's just spreading too fast, right? It's inevitable that it's going to hit something and catch the fire's going to catch.
Yeah, because there are people who disagree with us, right? They say, no, I don't need humans for the majority of my implementation anymore. And we're
That would
saying,
be fine if the client said that. It's not fine if the developer says that, right?
no, I'm not. By the way, I disagree. I agree with you 100%. I feel like as long as humans are buying stuff, you need humans at some point in the loop to actually
Yeah.
build the stuff. I don't think there's any question about that. It's really more about where it's kind of like, people like in agentic, development system to like IDEs, right? Okay, they're just tools like an IDE. Well, yeah, but I mean, it's like an exponential sort of leap and
I
from
think
like
that's
AI to an IDE is not as big of a leap as from an IDE to like Claude, right?
this is a kind of category error. It's one of my pet peeves. It's
Yeah,
like saying gold is a metal, right? Gold
right.
is a metal in the literal sense, but
Yes,
gold doesn't behave like a metal in the real world, right? Because
that's right.
it
It
has
has an
meanings way
emotional
beyond
quality,
the
it has
chemical
value.
properties. Similarly, you could look at cryptocurrencies, right? Cryptocurrencies all work similarly, but Bitcoin is in a class of its own because it's the only one which is immutable, right? If
Yeah,
there was another Bitcoin, it would be less immutable. So that would still not be. It would be like silver versus gold. So that's another place where there's a category error when in classifying AI as just another kind of autocomplete. It
right,
looks like that. It's basically is an autocomplete from an engineering perspective. It's the whole job of token model is to generate next token given everything else that came before it. But the emergent behavior that AI is given is of a class that doesn't exist in any other system, right?
right, right. Because even with autocomplete, you can't get rid of the developer.
Yeah.
If you really wanted to, you could vibe code something and sell it without even looking at it and sell it. You could do that. Now, I'm not saying it's going to succeed, but I think there's people who believe that, well, maybe these tools aren't where they need to be yet, but in a couple of years they'll be there. So let's just embrace them now because whatever. And I guess we're of a mind that interesting that you brought up legislation because I think that brings us to kind of the next. There's a couple layers I want to explore there. One is just a general comment. It's pretty sad that again the guys that are responsible for building this stuff are saying, "Hey, we're going to need legislation," and our legislators are like, "Oh, we don't need to regulate anything for like the next number of like in this country I think it's 10 years," and it's like we might as well start now because the problem is this, right? Like you don't want to put the smoke alarms in when your house is on fire, right? You want to do it
Yeah.
before your house is on fire. And and in this case, of course, you say, well, I'll do it tomorrow because, you never know when the house will catch fire. What we're
Right.
seeing, what you and I are seeing is that no, the fire is definitely coming, right? Because
Yeah.
somebody is going to release code into the wild that has tragic consequences. We've seen, you know, um, and I don't want to name any companies or names because we don't want to get sued,
Yeah.
but
We
like
can go into
we've
history,
already
right?
seen examples of people getting injured, getting worse because certain automated systems made mistakes, and there's already that. What we know is this is going to accelerate, and why are we not building these codes, these legislations, these regulations now so we can prepare for it? And the answer is, well, because we'll just deal with it when it comes. And I think we're in for a rude awakening. But with that said, let's talk about trust at a sort of at a system level. When we talk about when now you're when you think about certifications, you think about licensing. These are ways that companies today or individuals, if you're a practitioner of some sort, can go and get certified by a third party that's trusted by the industry, or maybe they get certified by a government under some certification, that's very common. And then now when you're selling your wares, somebody says, oh, they're certified in this, this, and this. As long as you're in good standing, then I know they're following these procedures. A lot of vendors have or a lot of buyers have security assessments that they actually require their vendors to fill out. For example, if you're going to touch their network with your software, you have to prove to them that and this is it where it gets really interesting because the questions that they ask you are like, tell me about your development process. Are you using static code analysis? Which tools are you using? What's your general, they ask you all this stuff. And if your answer is, oh, I just put it in, you know, some vibe coding tool and then, just run a couple of cursory tests on it and ship it, you're not going to pass that assessment. Right. Um, so, what is how, again, where do you think with these new agentic systems, because ultimately what's going to happen is when you try to be responsible and you try to follow all these rules, you're going to run into bottlenecks, and at some point someone's going to come and say, hey, we spent all this money on tokens. We even didn't hire developers because we thought we didn't need them, or maybe we got rid of some developers, and we're not doing anything any faster. In fact, we're having more failures during our quality assurance. We're having more rejections. PRs aren't getting approved fast enough. That's going to put a lot of pressure on especially, let's say, ambitious, people up in the corporate ladder, let's say, to potentially take shortcuts, right? To say, you know what, this stuff is good enough. We don't need this step anymore. We can just assume that if it gets here. What do you think the balance, like imagine, I guess here's the question. Imagine 2 years from now, okay? So you kind of know where the industry is now. You've seen in the last, say 4 years, we've seen LLMs go from basically, for the average person, glorified search with some sort of content generation capabilities with lots of mistakes, to like now building code that works usually on the first try, that works to do what it says. Like we've seen that evolution in like 4 years. So let's say 4 years. In 4 years, where do you think we're going to be with these agentic systems, and what are we going to be able to take shortcuts on the overall sort of validation side of things, or how are we going to reconcile this with how are we going to justify the investment when maybe we're not producing anything of quality any faster than we were before? Or are we going to get to a point where what's your prediction with the agentic systems where they're producing more quality just from the go and you can reduce your verification process?
I feel that, as the models get better and better and, there are bigger and bigger context, there's more and more stuff you can add to the model that will get it closer and closer to perfect. But then it ultimately boils down to, as a human being, as a human civilization, are we willing to delegate very critical things like finances and safety to a non-human? I mean, I don't mind the society where the robots are so perfect that they manage everything for us. But it seems like this emergent behavior of intelligence from a token predictor, right? It doesn't seem like it's real intelligence. Maybe it is. We can't say, but it just doesn't seem like that. It seems like, we robots would have to have reason inbuilt from the bottom up. And, the way they thought that AI would be built before, LLMs and things came along, they thought that we'd have rule-based models, and then you'd give them facts, and then you'd build up this network of knowledge, and then it would reason. But
Yep.
here it's just like, token prediction, and the emergent behavior is doing things, and it's just the last 5 tokens which you type is kind of like influencing the entire model to only respond to attend to that intent. And it's too surprising that it worked, right? No one knows how it does these things, because these emergent behaviors only were displayed once the models grew beyond a certain size. So, um, perhaps what we'll end up with is, other than some very critical, domains, whether it's finance or military and healthcare and stuff, you won't have many people, distrusting AI. They're just going to go with it. And
Yeah.
then that is going to take time to evolve. And the only thing we can think about is we already have quality issues with humans, right? It's nothing
Yes.
new. So there are patterns and there are behaviors and there are ways to kind of mitigate that.
But we have a very important thing with humans that we don't yet have with these agents, and that is we have accountability and we have remediation. We have
Right.
a human being does something wrong in a highly regulated system. We have a way to test whether it was malicious or an accident. We have a way to punish
Right.
them if it was malicious, and we have
Yeah.
a way to hold somebody accountable for trying to make things right in whatever way possible.
Yeah.
And those things are that's part of the societal part of things that are missing. But you were talking about, the highly regulated, the things that governments today agree are things that, you can't just delegate to automation. You need
Yeah.
humans in
I
the
mean, if you're asking me to get on a plane that's built by an AI, I don't know if I'll get on it in the next 10 years. I don't know whether I'll ever get on it
okay.
because I'm not sure that the incentives and the instincts that a human has and the humans developed in order to develop the knowledge to build a plane. I don't care if the guy is just a guy working for money on a plane, right? There's definitely something in his brain which is going to take into account that this is a critical system. I don't think
Yeah.
there's someone who can do a job competently will also be responsible, is what I feel, right? Depending on the
Yes.
domain that they're working. Otherwise, they would never get to that level of competency because those are kind of like hand in hand, right?
Right. Right.
Attention to detail in your code also means attention to detail in the design and so on and so forth. You can't have one without the other for too long. So I think that humans have individuality and we have individual rewards and we have guilt, we have fear, we have personal freedom and pain, which can
Mhm.
be, you get pain inflicted as punishment, or freedom's taken away, or you have your own personal or moral conscience which doesn't let you sleep at night if you didn't do the job well. I don't see what you could probably have an AI feel that way, but how do you, there's no question of individual punishment for an AI, right? There's no question
Right.
of putting in jail. Or the maximum you can do is you can find the company that owns it. But then these companies, I mean, there are very few companies which you can really cause damage to by finding them. I mean, like, how much can you fine some extra for?
Especially in this space, right, where we're
Yeah,
talking about billions and billions of dollars, right?
yeah.
So,
So I think going back to the kind of the science fiction narratives that I've read about, there is going to be a Luddite movement. There's definitely going to be a bunch of folks who will reject
right.
automation and technology,
Right.
probably after a couple of bad incidents. And
Yes.
there might be countrywide policies. Like the news yesterday is that China's has labor laws where you can't replace a person with AI in order to cut costs. You have
Right.
to kind of prove that the AI does a better job, and why aren't you able to retain that person? It's a kind of socialism or whatever labor thing.
Yeah. And this is very different in other, and this is very different in
Yeah,
capitalist. I mean, China is a totalitarian regime. It follows a socialist, system, and they can do these things and they
right.
control,
And for some reason, that kind of seems right because they have built the society on human capital, right?
yes,
It's
that's
the
right.
doctrine of whether for good or worse, it's the way it's turned out.
Yeah.
And that has to be protected because in eroding that, they'll destroy what the entire nation was built on.
Yeah. It's interesting, but I think the opponents will immediately say, and by the way, just an aside, but I remember just being in China, many years ago and being in a car and being driven on this highway that was built for the Olympics, whatever the Beijing, I forgot the
Mhm.
2008.
16 or the 8, yeah, 2008.
I think it was 8 Beijing. Yeah. So this must have been like shortly after that beautiful highway. And I remember one of my colleague, told me, you know how they built this highway? And I said, "How?" He said, "Shovels, like picks and shovels." Like they put some number of people to work to do this, even though they could, of course, do it with machines. By the way, the highway was perfect. It was a beautiful highway, kind of parkway that they had between these two locations. But back to the human capital, the government decided, as a public works project, you know what? We could, of course, do it with machines, but we can also do it with people, give them dignified work, have them build something that's tangible. and again, social capital. By the way, I'm not a socialist. I'm not advocating for this. Nothing like it. I'm just saying that's a mentality in the West, especially in the US. What you have is a cutthroat competitive environment with very few labor
Yeah.
laws. It's kind of the other extreme. It's not quite, the Industrial Revolution, England, or we did have some labor laws put into place, but at the end of the day, it's like, we're not uh, uh, we're not going to reward anyone for hiring more people. We're going to reward them for selling more product, right? That's the
Yeah.
that producing, so with that incentive system in place, and if there's profit attached to it, naturally the incentive is to reduce the amount of human labor, maximize automation, do all these different things, and that's built into our society. To your point about, the rejection that could happen, yeah, I mean, the science fiction, I mean, I think of Battlestar Galactica, right? Like, they were using even like wired, communication systems aboard spacecraft and stuff. They didn't want any networks or anything like that because they knew that the minute that they put intelligent agents on these networks, that they were being hunted. But it's a bit of putting the genie back in the bottle. People, I think you might have factions that reject these types of systems, but at the end of the day, progress continues, right? And so my hope is that we build the ethical codes and the accountability systems in place. And unfortunately, it's going to have to happen. Unfortunately, bad things are going to have to happen for sensible things to be put into place.
Yeah.
Say this around the world, because what we see, for example, in societies that are a bit more balanced, let's say, than the US, I think of the European Union, great ideas, protecting social capital and kind of, mixing that with wealth building and, kind of a nice balance, but they take way too long to get anything done, right? When
Yeah.
it comes to legislation because of the systems they have with consensus and all these different things. In the US, it's like, we'll deal with it when something bad happens, and then we very quickly put legislation in to do things. But at that point, like something really bad already happened. And then obviously in the other extreme is the more like the Chinas of the world that see these things coming and say, no, we're just not going to allow it from the go. Honestly, I don't know which model is going to work long term. I mean, because there's just so much force, pulling you.
Yeah, it needs to unfold. And I think everyone who has responsibility, whether it's governments or certain projects like, say, Linux, they're going to have the policies around how these things are going to
Sure,
be done.
sure.
And I think for the short term, us as developers, the best thing you can do is to kind of start looking for the right workflow which maximizes your code quality, because it's going to pay off.
Yes.
Being uh, being temperate right now and figuring out how to use it best before you ship a lot of code, it's just like building a team, or setting up a development process. So maturing as a developer, you have to get your system right, like your way of working. And if that includes AI, it has to be done for AI as well. What How can you work such that the quality of code that you provide with AI is faster, equally fun, and equally correct as what you expect your own code to be? And that's the holy grail. If you can get there, and even if you get like 1.5 to 2x improvement over your speed, you can live with that, because
That's still huge. I mean,
that's
that's
still huge.
yeah, yeah.
The whole idea of 50x and 20x and an entire company replaced by a single machine is, it's a little, you're aiming for too much. It's more than you can handle. It's like trying to build a nuclear reactor and you just have a nuclear bomb, right? It's much
Yeah,
more to contain that.
that's an interesting. Yeah, that's right. You figured out how to split the atom, but from there to actually to building a containment for it to actually produce things under your control, that's a
Yeah,
big leap.
more difficult than the Manhattan Project was, right?
Blowing things up is a lot easier than making things, right? And this is just, even if you're using the same raw material to do it, right? So yeah, that's really interesting. I think so maybe it is that our expectations, obviously we're in like the craziest part of the hype cycle right now. You've got futurists out there saying, see, we told you it's here, go for it. And you've got, lots and lots and lots and lots of billions of dollars, euros, everything being thrown at this stuff. And people are very vested in this being such a game changer. But to your point, the productivity leaps we've seen with kind of sea changes in the past, which is the only reference we really have, right? Think of like, the Industrial Revolution. This comes up all the time,
Mhm.
right? Or even the transistor, the microprocessor.
Yeah.
it took time for the systems around these inventions, these kind of mindset shifts to start outperforming. I mean, even if you think back to the automobile, right? Like they call it the horseless carriage. Well, because it wasn't that much faster than a horse-drawn carriage.
Correct.
It had all kinds of other problems, but little, that what the short the long view is that, yeah, but in, I don't know, 20, 30 years, now we're, you know, now we're 4 times faster, 5 times faster than a horse. We can carry, 10 times the amount of payload. So we did that 10x, let's say, in some decades. Maybe with this technology, it's the 10x comes a little bit faster. But to think that, hey, we're just going to release this stuff and immediately it's going to give you 10, 50, 100x, whatever it
And
is a little
the
crazy.
question the question is also, do we really need 100x or 1000x? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, during the Cold War, right? They kept building bigger and bigger
Right.
nuclear weapons, right?
Right.
And it was not meaningful in any sense because it doesn't make sense to destroy a country more than one time over, right? Whereas the numbers were in like the 40 or the 80 or the 100, right?
Right.
So, do you really need so much? I mean, what would you ask that AI to do which is capable of doing anything? It's like having a genie, and you know all those memes and jokes about genies, and you're not able to wish for the right thing, right?
Yeah,
You end
right,
up with
because
something
it'll
that
give you
you
exactly what you
unintended
asked for, and then, like,
consequences.
there's always the meme where the third wish undoes the other 2 and makes things even worse, Yeah, yeah.
So I think this number go up kind of way of doing research is it's a this is how researchers work, right? You
Mhm.
number go up, like you build motorcycles, you want to extract that another 5 horsepower, another 10 horsepower. Every year the race bikes get faster and faster, more power for the same sized engine. To what end? In
Yeah,
the racing world, is also they're saying that things have gotten too fast and the
sure.
racing no longer entertaining because people are not able to overtake.
Right. Nobody wants to watch a motorcycle race without riders, right? I mean,
Yeah.
some people might, but the majority of sporting, especially because now you're part of this is an interesting analogy. Part of racing vehicles, whether it's motorcycles or cars, is actually selling those to the general public or selling them to enthusiasts. If you're a
Correct.
high end, if you're showing this machine that drives itself and that has no rider and that's faster than the other one, it's like, well, but that's no good for me. What is that going to gain me? Because when I ride it, I'm going to have to wear a G suit. I'm going to need oxygen, all these different things. It's going to be supersonic. Like it doesn't have any meaning for humans anymore. And the question is, with software, if especially if software starts building itself, um, then how do we consume it? It's like we're the ones consuming it still.
People want to go into the agentic verse where there is no software. The AI is the software.
Yeah,
I was thinking of that. Actually, I spent a lot of time doing my stock market analysis app. And I realized, what if instead of building this app, on the day I want to, figure out the plan for the next year, I ask AI to generate the plan for me.
sure,
And I'm done, right? Why do I need a fancy UI and all that? And I
sure.
just give the same prompt the next year and I'm good for the next year. So do I really need a software? It's just that I'm conditioned to want to have all the sliders and buttons and graphs and so on.
Well, because you don't trust it. I think you just don't trust it to do it for you, right? Or you don't
Yeah.
trust it with maybe the amount of resource that you're going to throw at it. If you have a certain amount of resource and you give it a small piece of it, you say, here, go play with this, and then I'll give you more if you
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
well.
Yeah,
But you're
even
not there.
even to
Yeah,
the point where it's giving me a plan that I can check that it's giving me the right numbers for the past years and so on. As a software dev, I'm more inclined to say, okay, write me a program that would do that,
right,
and tell the AI to calculate it on the fly for me, right?
right,
Which is what I would have done if it was like 30 years ago and I had an investment guy. I would tell him like, why don't you do this math and give me the numbers, and
sure.
then I would know that he's done the numbers right, and I would do it. So maybe we're all wrong. Maybe the AI is the software. Maybe that's where it's going. Where you don't have applications, you don't have people who write code or people who consume code. You just have the AI showing what needs to show on the screen and following instructions. Right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's
But you
probably
still,
going to come to that.
in your example, you want to see the numbers because you want determinism around the plan. You want to, not because you're gonna, again, if you're asking something to build you a plan, it's because you don't think you can build you think you can build a better one with AI or whatever than you can. But so you're not going to check necessarily that. You're not going to validate the effectiveness of the
Yeah,
plan. You're just
yeah.
going to see that it has some kind of algorithm that makes sense, and because it's going to have to generate something deterministic for you.
Right, right. If I was asking the AI to do what I told it to do, I can't be sure of the algorithm that it's whether it's following the algorithm that I said, right? Might give me a plan and this plan might give a certain backtest. But were those the dates that I was supposed to buy? Maybe there's a different date that was better, which was actually what my code would have calculated. So it's
Yeah.
impossible to, it's just like trusting a human. You trust human because they got a degree and they've worked in the field and all that, and you assume that they do that right thing.
Yeah.
But AI is like a new species. It is
Yeah.
an alien. It is the alien that, we should
See,
be.
I think we're investing in the wrong technology, and here's what I mean. I would rather invest in time travel into the future, and I don't even need to be there. If I knew just 1 minute from now what's going to happen, I wouldn't need any other tool in my entire
Don't
life.
need alien.
So maybe we should be investing in that, but we'll see. All right. Well, Vivek, wonderful conversation. I think we tried to stay on topic. We always kind of end up at ethics every time we talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it is the end goal of like human life ultimately revolves around that. Without
Yeah,
it, there's no humanity, right?
yeah, and I think it's beautiful. I think it's great that we're thinking about this stuff. We care. You know, we want our species to survive and thrive, and we're not Luddites, right? We don't want to put this stuff back in the bottle. We want to use it responsibly. We're not sounding any alarms. We want to be very clear that um, we if you start delegating the things that make you great to something that you think is already great, we're not sure that we're quite there yet. And as far as humanity is concerned, we still put human beings above everything else. So I feel really proud of having that posture still. So anyway, wonderful speaking to you again, Vivek, about this. And maybe we should
Likewise.
do an episode just on ethics, although we just did that. So we'll find some way to talk about something that's not
Yeah,
specific.
there's a few things that we could still talk about trust. I mean, we could segue into that in one of our future podcasts.
Yeah, let's do that. All right. Well, so any closing thoughts before we?
Yeah, I would just reiterate that, it's very critical to establish if you're an existing developer and you've got some experience and you want to make sense of this new world. I think it's most important to be able to find a way by which you can generate code with an LLM that is up as good as the code that you would generate manually, right? And this has to be like it has to be really an honest. You have to be honest about it. There's no shortcuts.
Sure.
And even if it does make you slower, get that workflow in, and maybe in future you can get more productive with the same quality. But get to that quality level first before you think of the X. Maybe you do 1.5x, maybe you do 2x. And then if you can reach there and then you can fine tune your flow, maybe you find AI to do better and then you can scale more. Don't scale before you have the quality.
Yeah, that's great advice. So thank you again, and thanks to our
Thank you.
audience for listening. And please subscribe to the channel if you like what we have to say and you want to see more episodes. And if be sure to click like on this one if you enjoyed it. And we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
See you. Bye bye.